The girl hit the stone floor so hard her shoulder cracked against the edge of the iron grate, and the woman standing over her didn't flinch, didn't blink, just pulled her foot back for another kick. 6 years old, barefoot, already bleeding from her lip where the last strike had split it open 20 minutes ago. What happened in the next 48 hours would become the legend of the Northern Ridge Pack, a story whispered about for decades in every wolf territory from the frozen border to the southern coast. The kind of story that changed laws, the kind of story that made alphas lose sleep. But we're not there yet, not even close. The woman's name was Margot, beta female of the Ashwood Pack, tall, narrow face, hands that were always clenched even when she was calm. 3 things you need to know about Margot. She ran the pack's holding cells, she answered only to Alpha Gregor, and she believed with every fiber of her being that this little girl was garbage. Less than garbage. A stain. The girl's name was Wren. No last name. No pack registry. No parents anyone would claim. She'd been found 2 years earlier wandering the tree line during a winter storm, half frozen, wearing a shirt 3 sizes too big with no shoes. Gregor's patrol had picked her up, not out of kindness, out of policy. Unclaimed pups on pack territory got processed. Processed meant questioned, catalogued, and assigned. Wren couldn't answer questions. She was 4 and barely spoke. She couldn't be catalogued. No wolf scent on her, which meant she was either human or something nobody wanted to name, and she couldn't be assigned because nobody wanted her. So they put her in the cells. Believe me, I wish I was making this up. Not the real cells. Not the ones with chains and silver-laced bars where they kept rogues and enemies. The storage room beneath the kitchen. A stone space about 8 feet by 6 with a metal grate over a drainage hole in the floor. They gave her a blanket, a bowl of food twice a day, sometimes once. And Margot was put in charge of her, because Margot was in charge of everything nobody else wanted to deal with. 2 years. Wren lived in that room for 2 years. She learned to stay quiet. She learned to eat fast because sometimes the bowl got taken before she finished. She learned to press herself flat against the far wall when footsteps came because footsteps usually meant pain. Not always, but enough. The morning our story really starts, Margot had a reason to be angry. Alpha Gregor had just received word that the High Alpha, the Alpha King of the entire Northern Territory, was coming for an inspection, not a social visit, not a diplomatic courtesy, an inspection. That meant every cell, every record, every corner of the Ashwood compound was going to be examined, and Margot had a problem she couldn't file away. She stood over Wren, breathing hard. You're going to stay in this room. You're not going to make a sound. If anyone opens that door, you hide behind the barrels. Do you understand me? Wren nodded. She always nodded. Margot grabbed her by the chin. Hard. Wren's small hands came up instinctively and gripped Margot's wrist, not to fight, just to hold on, just to keep her neck from twisting. If anyone finds you, I'll make sure you never eat again. Not a scrap. You'll rot in here. Then she left, slammed the door, shot the bolt. Wren sat in the dark. She pressed her back against the cold wall and pulled her knees to her chest. Her lip was still bleeding. She wiped it on her sleeve, but the sleeve was already stained from last time, so it didn't matter much. Here's what nobody tells you about kids in situations like this. They don't sit around thinking about how unfair life is. They don't philosophize. They strategize. Tiny, survival-level calculations running constantly. Where's the safest corner? How long until the next meal? Which footsteps are dangerous and which ones aren't? Wren had mapped every sound in the compound above her. She knew the difference between the cook's heavy shuffle and Margot's sharp heel strikes. She knew that silence after midnight meant it was safe to stretch her legs. She knew the drainage grate was loose. She'd never tried to move it. Until today. Get this. The grate was old iron, set into the stone floor, maybe 2 feet across. It covered a narrow drainage channel that ran under the compound, originally built to carry water runoff from the kitchens out to the hillside. Wren had noticed months ago that one side of the grate wiggled when she pushed it. She'd never pushed hard enough to lift it because she'd never had a reason. Margot fed her. The room was cold, but it was shelter. The world outside that door was full of wolves who looked at her with disgust, or worse, didn't look at her at all. But something was different today. She'd heard the word inspection through the door. She didn't fully understand what it meant, but she understood Margot's fear. And she understood that when Margot was afraid, Margot got violent, more violent. The kind of violent that left bruises in places clothes covered. Wren got on her knees. She dug her small fingers under the edge of the grate and pulled. It shifted. A quarter inch. Rust flakes crumbled onto her skin. She pulled again. Her shoulder, the one she'd landed on, screamed, but she didn't stop. The grate lifted an inch, 2 inches. She got her other hand under it and shoved it sideways. It scraped against stone loud enough to make her freeze. She held still, listened. Kitchen sounds above, pots clanking, nobody coming. The channel beneath was narrow, dark, damp. It smelled like mud and old grease. Wren lowered herself in, feet first. Her hips barely fit. She had to turn sideways and press her arms flat against her body. The stone walls of the channel were slick and close, pressing against her chest and back at the same time. She moved. Inch by inch, she dragged herself through that drainage channel. No light, no space. Just the sound of her own breath bouncing back at her off-wet rock. 50 feet of this. 60. Her elbows scraped raw, her shoulder throbbed. Now I swear this happened because I talked to people who saw the evidence later. The blood smears on the stone, the tiny handprints in the mud at the channel's exit point. A 6-year-old girl crawled through 60 feet of underground drainage in the dark, alone, with an injured shoulder and an empty stomach. She came out on the hillside behind the compound. Late morning. The sun hit her face and she squeezed her eyes shut because she hadn't seen direct sunlight in weeks. Margot kept the storage room sealed, no windows. One dim bulb that burned out more often than it worked. Wren stood up on the grass. She swayed. Her legs were shaking from the crawl. She was covered in mud and blood and grime, wearing a torn shirt that hung past her knees and nothing else. No shoes, no pants, nothing. She didn't run. Where would she run? She didn't know the territory. She didn't know any territory. She just stood there on the hillside, blinking in the light, feeling grass under her feet for the first time she could remember. That's when the convoy arrived. 3 black vehicles coming up the main road toward the Ashwood compound gates. Flags on the lead car, the crest of the Northern Ridge Alpha King. His name was Kyle Draven. And you need to understand something about Kyle Draven to understand why this story went the way it did. He wasn't the kind of Alpha King who ruled from a throne room and signed documents. He'd taken the kingship at 23 by walking into a challenge ring against the previous king, a man twice his size and age, and ending it in under 4 minutes. He was 31 now, 8 years on the throne. He ran inspections personally because he trusted exactly no one to report the truth. He'd stripped 7 alphas of their territories in his reign. Not for disloyalty, for cruelty, for corruption, for failing the wolves under their command. The convoy stopped at the gates. Kyle stepped out of the second vehicle, tall, dark hair cut short, a jaw that looked carved from the same stone as the compound walls. He wore a simple black coat, no crown, no jewelry, nothing to announce his rank except the way every wolf within 200 yards instinctively lowered their head. Alpha Gregor was at the gate, smiling, hands open. "Alpha King, welcome. We've been expecting you. Everything is prepared for your review." Kyle looked at him, didn't shake his hand, didn't return the greeting. He scanned the compound grounds, the buildings, the tree line. His eyes stopped on the hillside. Now here's the thing. Kyle was 200 yards away. Wren was small. She was mud-colored against a brown hillside. She should have been invisible, but Kyle Draven didn't look away. "Who is that?" he said. Gregor followed his gaze. His smile collapsed. "That? I'm not sure. Probably one of the village children wandering too close. I'll have someone collect them." Kyle was already walking. Not toward the compound. Not toward the prepared tour route. Toward the hillside, His beta, a massive man named Thorn, fell into step beside him, hand moving instinctively to the weapon at his hip. Gregor scrambled to follow. Alpha King, I assure you, the inspection route begins at the main hall. We have records, reports, everything organized for your convenience. Kyle didn't slow down, didn't turn. He crossed the compound yard in long strides, past the kitchen building and started up the slope. Wren saw them coming. 3 large men moving toward her with purpose. Every instinct she had said run. Her legs tensed. Her eyes darted left, right, calculating exits the way she always did, small body wired for survival. She didn't run. I still don't know why. Maybe her legs were too tired. Maybe she'd been running in one way or another for so long that something in her just quit. Maybe she looked at the tall man in front and saw something she'd never seen in any adult's face before. He wasn't angry. Kyle stopped 10 feet from her. Just stopped. His beta stopped behind him. Gregor stopped behind his beta, already talking, already explaining. Kyle held up one hand and Gregor shut his mouth so fast his teeth clicked. For a moment, nobody moved. The Alpha King of the Northern Ridge stood on a muddy hillside and looked at a 6-year-old girl who was bleeding, shaking, covered in filth, and wearing a shirt that had once been white but was now the color of everything that had gone wrong in her life. Trust me on this. What I'm about to describe next, multiple witnesses confirmed independently. Kyle Draven, a man who had killed in challenge rings, who had broken territorial disputes with a single command, who had once stood unmoved while a rogue Alpha charged him at full speed. Kyle Draven's hands trembled. He lowered himself to one knee. Slowly. The way you move around something fragile. What's your name? His voice was low, not soft in the gentle way, low in the careful way. Wren stared at him. Her mouth opened, closed. She hadn't spoken to anyone except Margot in months, and speaking to Margot meant saying yes or saying nothing. Wren, she whispered. Wren. He said it back to her, not as a question, as an acknowledgement, as if her name was a real thing that mattered. Wren, where did you come from just now? She pointed down, at the ground, at the hillside. At the drainage channel exit behind her, a dark hole in the earth barely wide enough for a dog. Kyle looked at the hole, looked at her, looked at the blood on her arms, the bruise darkening on her shoulder, the split lip, the bare feet. His jaw tightened. Something in his expression shifted from careful to dangerous. He stood up, turned to Gregor. When he spoke, every wolf on that hillside felt it in their chest. You have 30 seconds to explain why there is an injured child crawling out of the ground on your compound. Gregor's face went white. Not pale, white. The blood drained out of it so fast he looked like a corpse, standing upright. She's an unclaimed foundling. We've been housing her. She's cared for. She must have gotten out of her quarters and hurt herself playing. You know how children... Quarters. Kyle said the word like it tasted rotten. Show me her quarters. Alpha King, I really think the main hall would be a better starting. Now, Gregor walked. He didn't have a choice. When an Alpha King gives a direct command, your legs move whether your brain agrees or not. He led them back down the hillside, through the kitchen entrance, down the narrow stairs, to the storage room. Kyle stood in the doorway. He didn't go in at first. He just stood there and looked. The stone walls, the drainage grate, still shoved aside, the dark hole in the floor, the single filthy blanket bunched in the corner, the dented metal bowl with dried food crusted on the rim, the stains on the floor that could have been water or could have been something else. The room smelled like mold and human waste and cold stone. It was 8 feet by 6. No window. One dead light bulb. Kyle stepped inside. He picked up the blanket, held it up. It was thin enough to see through, stained brown and yellow, stiff in places. He dropped it. He looked at the bowl. A few dried scraps of something that might have been oatmeal stuck to the inside. Here's what kills me about this moment. He didn't explode. He didn't roar. He didn't shift and tear Gregor apart right there in the basement, which every witness agreed he looked capable of doing. Instead, he turned around, walked past Gregor without looking at him, walked back up the stairs, walked outside. Wren was still on the hillside. Thorn had stayed with her, keeping distance, just standing between her and the compound with his back to her, as if guarding a door that didn't exist. Kyle walked to her. He took off his coat. It was black wool, heavy, probably cost more than everything the Ashwood pack owned in their kitchen. He held it out. Wren flinched. He stayed still, arm extended, coat hanging from his hand. She looked at it, looked at him. Then she reached out and took it. She pulled it around herself. It swallowed her completely. She nearly disappeared inside it, just her face visible, small and round and wary above the black collar. This is real. Kyle looked at Thorn. Get the physician from the convoy. Then he turned to Gregor, who had followed them back up the hill and was standing there trying to assemble words into something that might save his life. Where is the woman who runs your cells? Margot. She should be in the main hall preparing for... Bring her here. Gregor sent a runner. Kyle waited. He didn't speak. He didn't pace. He stood on that hillside next to a little girl wrapped in his coat and waited with the kind of patience that made everyone around him more afraid, not less. The physician arrived first, a woman from Kyle's personal detail. She knelt beside Wren with careful, professional hands. Wren shied away at first. The physician looked at Kyle. Let her come to you, Kyle said. Don't reach for her. The physician sat down on the grass, opened her medical bag, took out bandages, antiseptic, small items, laid them on the ground where Wren could see them, waited. Wren watched. After a minute she moved closer. Another minute she let the physician touch her arm. And I want you to picture this. The physician's face as she examined this child. She didn't gasp. She was a professional. But her hands stopped moving twice. Once when she saw the bruising pattern on Wren's ribs. Once when she checked the girl's back. She looked up at Kyle. These injuries are not from today, not from this week. Some of these scars are months old. Some are older than that. Now you better believe this next part because it's where everything pivots. Margot arrived. She came up the hillside with Gregor's runner, walking fast, already irritated, not knowing what was waiting for her. She saw Kyle. She saw Wren. She saw the physician. Her step faltered, just once. Then she straightened up and kept walking because Margot had been doing this long enough to know that confidence was her best weapon. Alpha King, she said. I'm Margot, beta female. I oversee domestic operations. How can I assist you? Kyle pointed at Wren. Is this your charge? Margot glanced at Wren. A quick, dismissive glance. The kind you give a stain on a carpet. The foundling. Yes, she's been under my care for 2 years. Care. Second time, Kyle repeated someone's word like it was poison. Your care includes the room below the kitchen, a temporary arrangement. Resources are limited. Alpha Gregor approved the placement. Kyle stepped toward her. 1 step. Margot held her ground, but her chin lifted, which meant her body wanted to back up and her pride wouldn't let it. I'm going to ask you a question, Kyle said. I want you to think carefully before you answer, because what you say next determines whether you walk out of this territory. Margot's hands clenched at her sides, her default setting. Did you strike this child? And here is where Margot made the choice that sealed everything. She could have broken. She could have confessed, begged, thrown herself on whatever mercy might have been available. But Margot didn't believe she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, Wren was nothing. An unclaimed, scentless foundling with no status, no pack, no wolf. Discipline was necessary. Containment was necessary. A child is difficult, Margot said. She requires firm handling. She's not one of us. She's not even confirmed wolf-born. I've managed the situation with the tools available to me, and I stand by my decisions. The hillside went quiet. Kyle looked at Margot for a long time. Then he looked down at Wren. And Wren, listen to me. Wren looked back at him, not with fear, not with hope, with something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who's been invisible their entire life suddenly realizing someone can see them. Kyle spoke, Not to Margot, not to Gregor, to Wren. Nobody will touch you again. 5 words. Under 15. He said them like he was setting them in stone. No explanation. No elaboration. He just said them, and they landed on that hillside. And everybody standing there knew they were absolute. Then he turned to Thorn. Gregor and Margot. Detained. Now. Thorn moved. He was fast for a big man. He had Gregor by the arm before the Alpha could take a step. 2 guards from the convoy took Margot. She started to protest, started to invoke rank and protocol, and Thorn said, "You can talk at the tribunal. Right now you're done talking." They were taken to Kyle convoy vehicles, secured. The Ashwood pack wolves who had gathered, and there were dozens now, drawn by the commotion, by the scent of their Alpha King's authority rolling off the hillside in waves, stood and watched. Nobody intervened. Nobody argued. Some of them looked at Wren and their faces said something complicated. Shame, maybe. They'd known. Some of them had known. They'd heard things through floors and walls and had done what people do when doing something feels too hard. They'd looked away. Kyle hadn't. The physician finished her initial examination. She listed injuries to Kyle in a quiet, clinical voice. Malnutrition, dehydration, bruised ribs 2 possibly cracked, scarring on the back and legs consistent for repeated impact, the shoulder injury from this morning, the split lip, developmental delays consistent with isolation and neglect. Kyle listened to all of it, absorbed it. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides so slowly and deliberately that the knuckles went white in stages. "She comes with us," he said. "She rides in my vehicle." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Protocol says foundlings go to the regional intake facility for—" "My vehicle, Thorn." Thorn nodded. That was that. Now, if this story is keeping you on edge, if you want to see how Wren's life unfolds after this, take a second and subscribe to this channel. We tell stories that matter, stories that stay with you. Hit that button so you don't miss what comes next. The convoy left the Ashwood compound within the hour. Kyle didn't finish the inspection. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough in 10 minutes to know that the Ashwood pack's territory was going to change hands. Wren sat in the back of Kyle's vehicle, still wrapped in his coat, watching the world slide past through windows she'd never looked through before. Trees, roads, sky. So much sky. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. Kyle sat across from her. He didn't try to talk to her, didn't force interaction. He had a stack of reports on his lap, other pack territories, other inspections, the machinery of running a kingdom, and he worked through them. But every few minutes he'd glance up, check on her, make sure she was still there, still breathing, still real. About an hour into the drive, Wren spoke. "Are you going to put me in a new room?" Kyle set down his papers. "What kind of room?" "A small one, with a door that locks." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "No. Where will I sleep?" "Somewhere with a window, and a real bed, and a door you can open from the inside whenever you want." She considered this. Her face worked through something, not emotion exactly, but calculation, checking for the trick, waiting for the catch, because there was always a catch. "Why?" she asked. Kyle didn't answer right away. He sat back, looked at her. And here's the moment of vulnerability that nobody expected from a man who'd built his reputation on iron authority. "Because I had a room like yours once," he said. "A long time ago. Before I was this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the convoy, at everything. "And someone opened the door for me. I'm just doing the same thing." Wren pulled his coat tighter around herself. She didn't say anything else, but she stopped pressing against the far side of the vehicle. She moved, just slightly, just a few inches, toward the center, toward him. Back at Ashwood, things moved fast. Kyle's authority wasn't ceremonial. Within 3 days, Gregor was stripped of his alpha rank. Formal tribunal, witnesses called, pack members who'd stayed silent for years finally spoke because the man who held ultimate power had made it clear that silence was no longer safer than truth. The evidence was overwhelming. Wren wasn't the only one who'd suffered under Gregor's negligence. but she was the youngest and the most defenseless. Margot was tried separately. Her defense, that Wren was unclaimed and therefore not entitled to pack protections, was dismantled by Kyle's own legal counsel in under 20 minutes. Northern Ridge law was clear. Any child on pack territory, regardless of origin or status, was afforded protection. Margot's firm handling was legally classified as what it actually was: assault on a minor, confinement, systematic abuse. Margot was sentenced to exile, stripped of her rank, stripped of her pack bonds, and turned out beyond the territorial borders with nothing. No allies, no protection, no pack. She walked out through the same gates she'd controlled for years, and not a single wolf watched her go. Gregor was imprisoned in one of his own cells, the real ones, with the silver-laced bars. There was a particular kind of justice in that, though nobody said it out loud. Wren was taken to the Northern Ridge capital, to Kyle's own compound, not to an intake facility, not to a foster rotation, to the Alpha King's personal household. This raised questions, concerns. Pack advisors who valued protocol over principle lined up to explain why this was irregular, unprecedented, potentially destabilizing. Kyle listened to every one of them. Then he assigned Wren a room on the second floor of the main residence, a real room, with a window that overlooked the eastern forest, a bed with actual sheets and blankets that weren't see-through, a door with no lock on the outside. The first night, the household staff reported that Wren didn't sleep in the bed. They found her in the morning curled up on the floor in the corner, wrapped in Kyle's black coat. The second night, same thing. The third night, Kyle walked past her room. The door was open. She never closed it, couldn't stand the feeling of a closed door. He saw her on the floor. He went in, picked up a pillow from the bed, and set it down next to her on the floor. Didn't say a word. Just put the pillow down and left. On the fourth night, the pillow was on the floor, and Wren's head was on it. On the seventh night, the pillow was on the bed. You hear me when I tell you this. Recovery is not a single moment. It's not a dramatic breakthrough where music swells and everything is fixed. It's a pillow moving from the floor to the bed over the course of a week. It's a child learning that a door can stay open. It's the smallest possible unit of trust, built one night at a time. Weeks passed. Wren started eating regular meals. She gained weight. The bruises healed. The ribs mended. The physician visited weekly and tracked progress that was measurable but slow. Developmental delays were real. Wren was 6 but functioned in many ways like a child half her age. 2 years of isolation had taken things from her that would take years to rebuild. Speech, social interaction, the basic assumption that the world wasn't actively trying to hurt her. Kyle assigned a dedicated caretaker, a woman named Iris who'd raised 4 pups of her own and had the kind of patience that came from real experience, not textbooks. Iris didn't push, she was just there, present, available, warm without being overwhelming. Wren started speaking more. Short sentences at first, then longer ones. She asked questions constantly. What's that tree called? Why is the sky that color? Where does food come from before it's food? And she asked about Kyle. Where does he go during the day? When is he coming back? Why does everyone call him king? Listen carefully now. This is where the story takes its final turn. 3 months after Wren arrived at the Northern Ridge capital, Kyle convened a formal session of the High Council, full attendance, every regional alpha, every senior advisor, every ranking wolf in the territory. He stood at the center of the council hall. Wren was not present. She was upstairs with Iris, building something with wooden blocks, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I'm filing a claim of guardianship, Kyle announced. Legal, formal, and binding under Northern Ridge law. The foundling known as Wren becomes my ward. Under my name, under my protection. Permanently, the council erupted. Not all of it negative. Some alphas nodded, some looked relieved that someone was taking responsibility. But the opposition was loud. She has no wolf, one advisor argued. She may be entirely human. The Alpha King's household cannot harbor a non-wolf. The precedent alone would destabilize. The precedent, Kyle said, cutting him off, is that we protect children. If that destabilizes us, we deserve to be destabilized. Another advisor, there are proper channels. Intake facilities exist for this exact. I've seen the intake facilities. I've inspected them. 3 of the 12 in my territory are barely better than what she came from. That silenced the room, because they knew he was right. And they knew he knew specific names and locations and details that none of them wanted spoken aloud. The vote went through, not unanimously, but decisively. Wren became the legal ward of Alpha King Kyle Draven, the first non-confirmed wolf to be formally placed in a royal household in Northern Ridge history. But here's what seals this whole thing, what makes it a legend and not just a policy change. 6 months later, Wren shifted for the first time. No warning, no build-up. She was in the garden with Iris, chasing a butterfly, a completely ordinary 6.5-year-old moment, and her body changed. Right there on the grass, the wolf that emerged was small, pure white, not grey, not silver, white head to tail, without a single marking. The rarest color in Northern Ridge history, the kind of wolf that hadn't been born in 5 generations. Iris screamed. Not in fear, in shock. She stood in the garden with her hand over her mouth and watched a white wolf pup tumble over its own legs, roll in the grass and sneeze. Kyle was in a meeting when word reached him. He left mid-sentence, walked out of a strategic session with 3 regional alphas and didn't excuse himself. He crossed the compound at a pace that made his guards jog to keep up. He found Wren in the garden, still shifted, still white, still small. She was sitting in the grass looking at her own paws with an expression that somehow translated perfectly from wolf to something deeply confused. Kyle knelt beside her. The white pup looked up at him. He put his hand on her head. She leaned into it, and a sound came out of her, not a howl, not a growl, but a low, steady hum that wolves make when they feel safe, when they feel home. And I need you to understand the weight of what happened here. The girl they threw in a stone room, the girl with no name, no pack, no status, no wolf anyone believed existed. The girl Margot kicked and starved and locked away in the dark. That girl was a white wolf, one of maybe 4 alive on the continent. She hadn't shifted earlier because she hadn't been safe enough. A wolf won't emerge in a body that's under constant threat. The animal knows. It waits. It protects itself by staying hidden until the environment proves that emerging won't mean destruction. It took 6 months of open doors and real meals, and a pillow on a bed and a caretaker who didn't push, and an alpha king who didn't look away. 6 months of proving that the world wasn't a stone room. Then the wolf came. Word spread the way fire moves through dry country. The Ashwood foundling was a white wolf. The Alpha King's ward was a white wolf. The girl they'd kept in a basement was something sacred, something most wolves would never see in their lifetime. And people had opinions about that. Plenty of them. Wolves who'd ignored Wren's existence suddenly wanted proximity. Packs that had never shown interest in foundling welfare started calling the capital with offers of support, alliance, partnership. Funny how that works. Funny how a child nobody wanted becomes everyone's priority once her value becomes visible. Kyle saw through every one of them. He issued a statement that became famous in its own right. 3 sentences delivered at a public address. Wren is not a symbol. She is not a political asset. She is a child under my roof, and she will be raised as such. End of discussion. Nobody pushed it. Wren grew up in the Northern Ridge capital. She never fully lost the wariness, that survival-level radar that kept part of her brain scanning for threats at all times. It faded, but it never disappeared. She was quiet in groups. She preferred the garden to the great hall. She read obsessively once she learned how, consuming books the way she'd once consumed scraps from a dented metal bowl, quickly, hungrily, as if they might be taken away. But she laughed. That came back too, not right away. The first time Iris heard Wren laugh, really laugh, not the performative noise kids make when they think they're supposed to, Iris had to leave the room because she didn't want Wren to see her cry. And Kyle, the Alpha King who had built his reputation on strength, on challenge victories, on the ability to command a territory with a single word. That man sat on the floor of a child's room and built towers out of wooden blocks, and let a 6-year-old knock them down over and over, and laughed every time. This is the story they tell in the Northern Ridge. Not the story of a white wolf, not the story of a political shift or a legal precedent. The story of a man who looked at a muddy hillside, saw something small and broken, and didn't look away, because that's the rarest thing in the world. Not a white wolf, not an alpha king. The rarest thing is a powerful person who sees suffering and chooses to walk toward it instead of around it. Wren was trapped, beaten, and forgotten. She was 6 years old in a stone room in the dark with a grate in the floor, and a woman who saw her as less than nothing. She had no name anyone cared about, no pack, no protection, and no reason to believe anything would ever change. Then the Alpha King looked at a little girl on a hillside, and he didn't look away. That became the legend of the Northern Ridge. That became the story whispered for decades. Not because of what Wren was, because of what Kyle did, because a child who should have disappeared into the dark instead walked into the light wearing a black wool coat 300 sizes too big and carrying the protection of the most powerful wolf alive. They say in the capital, if you visit on a clear day, you can see a white wolf running the eastern tree line at dawn. Full grown now, faster than anything on 4 legs, free, and if you ask anyone in the territory how that wolf got there, they'll tell you the same thing. Someone opened the door.